Hello, thank you for joining me today. We're going to be doing a very small canvas today in acrylic. So this is one called Artist Line Canvas. I got it in my little local craft shop, which is just up the road from me. If you are local, it's the one called, now let me think, Rowan Tree Crafts in Carnforth. So as you can see, it was just £1.30, and you can get these in lots of shops, art supply shops, usually just shrink wrap like this, and it's an unbleached one. And it's primed, and they usually come nowadays primed, so we don't have to worry about putting anything on it to begin with. So I just need some scissors to get that out. One moment. So obviously when you're taking this off, you want to be careful that you don't go through the canvas. And just get that ripped off. Okay, so it's got the size on there, 10 centimetres square. Put those in the bin. So the reasons for using acrylic, you'll notice from my videos that I don't use them that often myself, but I'm going to try and use them more. I did a painting recently for a friend and I wanted it to dry rather quickly, so I chose to use acrylic instead of oil. And I was quite pleased with how it came out. In the past I've not liked them because of how quickly they dry, so they don't remain workable. But if you're quick and you work quick and think about it, you can get some really nice effects similar to you would in your oil painting, blending the colours together. Today we're just going to do a very simple sunflower, just something nice and cheerful. And the reason I chose a sunflower, I thought it's a nice big round shape that would fit well into the square. So think about the shape of your canvas as well before you start whatever you're doing when you're planning. What subject suits the shape of your canvas and the size and scale as well. You know, it would look a bit silly putting an elephant on a 10 centimetre square canvas. So to begin with, I'm just going to cover the whole lot, I think in a nice brightish yellow, and then build up on top of it, and I'll do the sides in that as well. And the good thing about the acrylic is it's going to dry really quickly, so we can do it all fairly quickly, layer on layer, and use the hairdryer to dry in between. So I've used these ones before, and I did do a video on how to keep them, and I'll put the link up there, you know, for if you've got any left over, how to keep it fresh for the next day. So it's the Royal Talons one, and this colour is primary yellow. And I'm going to mix in some white to that as well. And it's a titanium white, which is the same white that I use in my oil paintings. Okay, and the brushes that I'm going to be using today are these Royal Taklon ones, and I think they all came in one packet. That one's a Jackson's one actually, but these are various sizes and shapes as you can see, but we're not going to need anything too big. But also don't go for anything too small, let's get too fiddly, make it nice and striking without getting into too much fiddling about. So the nice thing about these, not for working on canvas perhaps, but sometimes with your oils, and sometimes with your things like brush-o and mixed media, they have this nice shaped end that you can push the paint around with and shape the paint with. So that's something handy about these inexpensive brushes. So they don't last forever, but because they're quite cheap, they're quite handy to have. Okay, so I'm just going to mix together some of the yellow and the white. I'll put those brushes out of the way for now. And not using a huge amount of water because we want it to be nice and thick really. So you'd probably call that a cream consistency. We made a nice lemon colour that's just going to give us a nice background to work on too. It might all be covered up in the end, but it's nicer I think to work onto a colour than working straight onto the white, and it's going to dry quite quickly. And that colour is going to shine through some of your other painting. So this canvas, it's actually going on quite nicely. It's not too, you know, there's not too many ridges on it, so we're not having to work away to get it to fill in all those gaps, which sometimes you do have to do. So it's quite a smooth finish to it, this one. I did buy two, so I might come back and do something completely different on the other one another day. Maybe in a different media. I might use Inktense on it. I have used Inktense on canvas before, and it comes out quite well. So you could dry that before you did the edges. or you could just very carefully, like I did, just hold inside here. And again, up the edges, can you see where the, I'll just tilt it, where it's sort of folded? You really need to get your brush into there to get that all coloured. Because the good thing about these little canvases is they're very easy to display. Somebody might be just popping it on the side, propped up. So you want the sides to look neat. So again, get that in there. So if you use too much water, you're going to end up with this dripping and running. So this nice thick creamy consistency is best, so we're not going to get any runs. So once we've covered the whole thing, you just smooth it all off with your brush to make sure there's no runs anywhere. And then just pop it down flat, and then we can, if we like, either just leave it for a few minutes to dry, or we could give it a blast with a hairdryer, which I think I will do. Okay, so that literally took a couple of minutes to dry, so that's all nice and dry, and it's covered evenly. Actually quite a nice colour that, just with that little touch of white into the yellow. So for the actual drawing, I don't want anything too dark or too light, because we don't want it to shine through too much from the finished painting. I'm struggling now to get the lid off this one. So as you can see, I've used my teeth when I really shouldn't have. I do have some pliers in here, which is always handy to have some pliers nearby your paints so that you can use those for opening them. So we've got here burnt sienna, and this is a Winsor & Newton one, and that should be enough just to do the drawing. I'll leave the top on quite loosely for now, because no doubt we'll need some more out, and don't want to wreck my teeth getting any more out. So again, I'm going to put a little bit of white into that so that it's a mid-tone rather than anything too dark or too light. But it's a nice warm tone to go with the subject that we're doing. And the great thing about acrylics is you're not going to have to worry too much about your drawing being accurate, because if you go wrong, you can just paint over it. So I haven't got a reference photo. I know people like to put reference photos on to show what I've been copying from, but this is just out of my head. So we've just got an ellipse there for the centre of the flower, so it's not going to be plumb on to us, it's going to be sort of half facing this way, and then we can start and fill in some petals. And there are quite a few different varieties of sunflower, but most have sort of 2 layers of petals or more, quite full. Like I've said before when I've been doing my demonstrations, whilst you're at home, you'll be able to turn your canvas around more to get your arm in a good position. I don't like to turn the canvas around too much because of where the camera is and things, and the tripod, but it might be easier for yourself to move the canvas around to get your arm in the right position for doing the petals as you come around the flower. So here, just sort of altering it, because we're going to be seeing the underside of these ones as we come around. This is sort of curled up. And then they have more layers of sort of green petals underneath. We'll put more detail in that when we come around to that later. Should have had more here, I think. Don't want to cover the whole of that centre up because that's quite a nice part of the sunflower with the sort of seed heads and things. So when you do your stalk, start at the centre of the flower, bring your arm down and think about where it's going to be joining up. Think about putting a leaf shape on to give a bit more interest. So if you're not confident enough to do a drawing without a reference photo, I'm sure you can quickly find some sunflower pictures on the internet. Or what I do is, if you're into gardening, I've got quite a lot of gardening books and you can look in there for different varieties of plant. So I'm not going to do too much more drawing. I think that's a nice shape for the sunflower itself. So now I've got that shape in, I'm going to do the background. And I'm just wondering actually whether to leave the background that colour, but I think I will make it more yellow and a bit more variety in it. Blue would look nice also, wouldn't it? Yeah, let's go for some blue. Make it a nice sunny day. So again, I'm going to put some white into that blue because I want it to be looking like it's midsummer and we've got a nice bright blue sky. Okay, so that's all blue now and it all dry. Again, it only took a couple of minutes to dry. So you'll notice there, as I was going along, I was making more of the same blue colour up with the blue and the white. That's not particularly good practice. I do it all the time and it's a habit I've got into, and I tend to be not too bad at getting the same colour again. But if you want to be sure of having the same colour quite even, make sure you make enough up to begin with and don't be making it up as you go along. You know, it is difficult, we don't always know, we can quite easily end up not having enough. Okay, so sunflowers, although they are yellow and we think of them as yellow, they are quite an orangey yellow, there's quite a bit of red in there. So I'm going to add some red to the yellow now, and this time I won't be adding any white, just mix the red and the yellow together. And have a lot more yellow than red. So essentially it's on the yellow side of orange. And we can start and do these petals. Now I probably will speed this up because it's going to take me a little while. To begin with, I'll just more or less cover the whole thing, going straight over those lines, because we're not putting any detail in at the moment, we're just starting to build up some colour. In fact, I will go over all this as well, just go over the whole thing, because we can still see those lines through. Some of this down the bottom here is going to be green, but we can come back and go over that with the green later. Now this time I'm not going to dry it out because it's drying pretty quick anyway, and what I want to do is get some yellow and white into that whilst it's still wet, if I can. So just doing one petal at a time. I'm going to start and mix some of these colours together now. And try and keep it quite wet if I can. If it dries out too much and you're not happy with what you've done, you can always go over it. So I've not added any water to this yellow, it's just going on neat straight out of the tube. It's got a nice thick look to it now, and leaving some of the brush strokes to get quite a painterly feel rather than a too polished feel about this. And just use the shape of your brush to get some of those curves in. When you alter the pressure on your brush, you're going to get some nice lines. And some white now for some highlights. So of course the sun's going to be hitting more on the tips of the flower. And if you feel it's too white, you can also always come back and blend that colour in a little bit more. We shouldn't overdo it with white really, but it is nice to get some contrast in there and some highlights. So if you work quickly and keep it wet, then you can blend more. If it dries out too quickly, you're not going to be able to blend with the acrylics. So what I'm going to do now is dry off my brush. So far I've just been really using this one brush, and it's a number 3 round. And do a little bit of blending whilst it's still wet, but working very, very quickly, otherwise we're not going to be able to do this. Using the sienna for the drawings made it a nice warm feel overall for this flower. These layers that we're building up. Now I will just let those dry a little bit now before I add any more layers to them. Come back later and get one or two of these edges a bit neater. But like I said before, I don't want it to be too polished and neat. And we need to make up a green now. So we've already got the blue and the yellow out, so let's mix some of those together to get some green. And again, I will add a little bit of white to that because I don't know if you can picture them, but they're quite pale, these stems of sunflowers. So you probably want more yellow than blue and a touch of white into that. And I'm using this palette because I don't want to mess up my nice watercolour palette, but I wouldn't advise using a pink palette for the reason that you can't test your colours very well. You can't tell what your colours are like when they're against that pink. So this is why I always work on top of a sheet of paper, because I can just give them a quick test if I want. So really, if you have already got some acrylic paints and you buy one of these little canvases for, what was it I said, £1.30, and some cheap brushes, you can soon make someone a nice little gift. Make a nice little get well gift, or a nice cheerful thing for a child's bedroom. So if we think about, oh hang on, we haven't done the leaves underneath the flower yet, have we? We have some of these are leaves that sort of unfurl a bit like the petals as well underneath. Okay, so we need to think about also where the shade is now. So if the sun's from up here, we're going to have some shadow underneath. So let's take a little bit of that blue and add it to that green now. And again, whilst it's still wet, we'll get a bit of shade into here. And again, on the underside of the leaves, it's going to be more shady. Perhaps down one side of the stalk. And all this is just going to make it feel a little bit more three-dimensional. It's quite a naive drawing. We're not doing anything too polished or a great masterpiece. We're just making something that's cheerful and fun, and like I said, very inexpensive. And I think I'm going to just blend in, whilst it's a little bit still wet, some of this nice colour that we had to begin with, that we used for the underpainting, just here and there, a bit of highlight on the leaf, top side of the leaf. Not too much. Again, dry your brush off and blend that in a little bit. Now when it's still wet, I don't know if you can tell there, if your brush is wet and your paint's still wet and you try and blend, sometimes you can run the risk of picking the paint up again and pulling it off, so just be a little bit careful. Go around the stem a bit as well, try and make some shape to it. Now I think I'm just going to give it a dry off before we do any more. So the next step I think we need to do really is get some of the brown. Again, need to use my teeth. So I've got the burnt sienna out, and now we've got the burnt umber. Oh heck, can you see what's happened there? that's all dried up and it's coming out of the corner there. Never mind. So we don't need too much of that because this is just for doing some little dots in the centre. So they sort of go around in, they get lighter as they go towards the outside edges. Again, it depends on the age of the flower and the stage of the development. And I'm just going to start with the umber on the inside and just dotting it with the end of my brush, going around those petal shapes. So you're doing a bit of negative painting around these petals that are turned in here. And keeping it nice and dark. But nice and dotty. And then I'm going to pick up some of this sienna and carry on those dots to fill in the rest of this shape that we began with the ellipse. Dry off that brush, and I want to put one or two more of the darker colour into that sienna as well, just to bring it up a little bit. Try not to lose the dot effect. And I think that's probably enough. We don't want to overdo it with that centre. When it's dry, we might come back in and put one or two little yellow and white bits in to get some highlights in there. Now, whilst I've got that umber on the palette, I'm going to mix it with a tiny bit of blue to get a really nice dark colour that I can use as a shadow colour to put under here. To pick out one or two of those shapes and form some deeper shadows. And it's really just an impression actually. I've not really put much thought into the drawing of those leaves under there. It's just an impression of the shapes that they might form on the bottom side of there. And that's just some of that under colour again, put on quite lightly, just to give us a bit of a highlight there. So I'm going back now to the original green colour. I'm going to just try and tidy up a little bit under here. Can you see where we've still got some of those lines from the sienna that we put on originally when we did the drawing? Just get them covered up with some of this nice rich green. And I'm doing what I said we weren't going to do, which is fiddling too much. So I think we'll just leave that now, the actual stem and leaves. Leave them quite basic. It's a touch of green in that leaf, gone too light with that. So you can probably tell I'm going over bits that I've already done, and the colours are still coming through in the form of those shadows and things, because when I've added water to the paint it's making it a little bit thinner and those underneath colours are still showing through. So you can use it just to put a glaze over the top as well, if you have plenty of water. Okay, so the petals are pretty much dry. So I'm going to come back and put extra detail in those. So I'm going to, that first colour of orange that we made, I'm going to put some extra red into that to make it a little bit darker, more of a red orange. And this is going to help form a shape of the leaf, petals rather, by putting some in the centre of the petal where it would be darkest if it was curled over. I'm not necessarily doing lots on every petal, just here and there. And in some places we can't even sort of really distinguish between one petal and the next, but you probably wouldn't be able to at a distance with the real thing. So we're going to come back to this yellow, and we're going to use the yellow straight out of the tube if we can. We've made a bit of a mess here. Might have to get some more out actually. And I will put a little bit of white into that because it makes such a lovely lemony colour. Like I said before, you can still see the form of the other colours underneath making the shapes of those petals, even though we're putting that on top because it's not too thick. We've got some water in there, but still seeing brush strokes. So we've not used very many colours at all, but because we've used them in different strengths and in slightly different mixes with more yellow or more red, more white, we've got a nice variety of light and shade. So we usually finish a painting with the highlights, and the main thing to say about highlights is don't overdo it. And it's quite good actually not to use just white. Use white with a little bit of your lemon that's left over. And just with this centre bit we'll just do some dots, but not too many. Where the sun's going to catch on those top ones. This top petal's obviously going to be nice and light. We'll just tidy that shape up whilst we're there as well. But don't spend hours tidying every single one up because they look quite nice, just quite painterly, leaving the brush strokes. So just think about where your light source is and which edge the sun is going to be hitting. And I did say we wouldn't come back to these leaves, but I'll just put, obviously this leaf here is going to get a little bit of a highlight on it. Just make it into a nice shape as we do it as well. And blend that in a little bit. Oh, can you see I've got too much water on my brush there, so I'm just taking it off with a tissue. And with acrylics it doesn't really matter because usually the layers underneath have already dried and you can just wipe it off. So you can see if you don't allow things to dry too quickly you can blend them in a little bit. I just feel we've not got a definition here between the stem and the leaves, so I'll just get a little bit of lighter green, put an edge to that leaf there to whiten it maybe. Again, I'm starting to fiddle here, but I was just wanting to try and get a bit of form into these leaves, but with a bit of extra dark. And I think we should probably leave it at that. Just a tiny bit of yellow straight from the Okay, so I'm going to try and take my own advice now and stop fiddling and just leave it at that. I hope you've enjoyed that. Like I say, completely out of the imagination, but you can get plenty of sunflower pictures off the internet. I'm sure you've probably got some in magazines and gardening books and things at home as well. So like I say, you can make a really nice little gift just with a very inexpensive canvas that you can buy more or less anywhere really. And with your acrylics that are going to dry really quickly, so within an hour you can have a nice little painting done. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to do some more work in acrylic. The one I did the other week was a landscape, and I did quite a lot of blending. It would take, you know, it took me quite a few hours to do it, but I could do something like that to show you how I work that as well. So yeah, like I say, put it in the comments below if you have any questions about the acrylic paints, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.